Welcome to the Big Bets on Campus podcast. We are here to discuss Feast Week in college basketball. That's right, we're sneaking in a little college hoops action in between all of the college football stretch run. And that means that you're going to be able to go back to your podcast feed and get more from Colin Stuck, Mike Iannello, and myself handling everything in the G5 leading all the way up to next week when we handle the last week of the regular season in college football. But for right now, we get to talk about two of the best MTEs, those are multiple team event tournaments in all of college basketball. Of course, I'm referring to the Maui and the Battle for Atlantis. I'm joined by Tanner McGrath, who has been so kind to us over the years, giving us 1,000-word, rundowns on the UConn offense, getting into all of the machinations of Dan Hurley's brain, as well as everything that goes on in the America East. But he is a college basketball expert across the board. He's going to walk us through these two tournaments. We're going to give out both our best bets, our favorite long shot to win these, and a play from the first round of both the Maui and the Battle for Atlanta. So Tanner, first, let me walk you in here. What are your thoughts on early season tournaments? Is it just my imagination, or have they gotten better over the years where they're now marquee events being able to compete with college football?
Feast Week is probably the second best single week of the year behind Conference Championship Tournament Week. It is wall-to-wall action for 12 straight days, starting from 11 a.m. Eastern to midnight every single day. And the best part about it is you finally start to learn a lot about these teams, especially the high major ones who play cupcake non-con schedules for their first few games, Ken Pom sub 300 teams. And then, I'm really excited to learn a lot about UConn. I think we'll learn more about Memphis too, Auburn, some of these other teams. So we're in it. It's best time of year.
All right, you mentioned some of those teams. Let's get to the card in the Maui. We'll start with the rundown on the odds to win the tournament. UConn at plus 170 is the favorite. Auburn just north of 3-1. North Carolina 4-1. Iowa State sitting in that 9-2 range. Michigan State starts the long shot grouping 13-1 for the Spartans. Memphis at 30-1. Dayton at 40-1, and Colorado rounding out the field at 55-1. An absolutely loaded field. If you look at the AP rankings for these teams, UConn number 2, Auburn number 4, Iowa State number 5. So we got 3 top 5 teams right off the bat. North Carolina sneaking into the top 10 as well, and Michigan State and Memphis both receiving votes in both polls. So this is a star-studded event from the get-go. And let's start with UConn. I want to get your thoughts on the Huskies. It's clear Hurley was hoping to grab the attention of his team, calling them out for their rebounding and turnover issues, despite beating East Texas A&M, formerly Texas A&M Commerce, by 35 points. Do you think it was just theatrical, he just wanted to have some bulletin board material, or do you think he actually has some concerns about how his team's playing headed out to the islands?
I think that Dan Hurley doesn't exactly know what he has with this roster yet. I think that replacing Klingon with the duo of Terrace Reed and Samson Johnson presents its own issues. I think they bring half-decent rebounding and half-decent defense, but Klingon was such a dominant interior rim protector and drop coverage defender, and he was a huge bailout option for the offense in post-up sets and by slipping and cutting ball screens. So, Reed is okay as an interior creator. Johnson is severely limited offensively to just lob and roll threats. But also, Aiden Mahaney has been MIA for the first month of the season, and that's huge because he really needs to replace the Cam Spencer production. Hassan Diarra is running into a turnover problem with higher usage rates. So I think UConn's still getting too much love in the market, especially in this tournament, and I'll talk about my favorite team to win in a second. And I think that there are some legitimate problems that Hurley still needs to figure out how to solve. And like I said, I'm very intrigued to see what we'll get out of them against Memphis, because we haven't learned anything about them against 4 nobodies. So I think UConn's a little overvalued. I think that there are real problems here to at least be handled. I'm sure Hurley can figure something out, but in the early season, there are question marks.
Well, let's not bury the lead here. It seems like you're interested in Auburn at north of any number of 3-1. Evan Mia rates Johnny Broome as his top player in all of college basketball. And when he goes through the most optimized high-end lineups in the entire country, when they roll out Baker, Mazzara, Broome, Johnson, Jones, and Pettiford, according to Evan Mia, it's the top-rated offensive lineup in the entire country by a wide margin. But if you watch some of the Tigers games this season, it does appear as though defensively, they've taken a step in the right direction. They're making it very difficult on teams to get into their sets. They're making them use more of the shot clock. Do you think that that is just the byproduct of some mismatched setups early in the season playing against teams that they have absolutely dominated? Or do you think this is a change that they can rely on to make a deep run in March?
So I'll just go ahead and I'm just going to say it. Auburn is my pick to win this tournament at anything north of 3-1. I think that this market is mispriced. The simple handicap is that I think Auburn is the best team in this field by a wide margin and should be favored over UConn. I would make them favorites over UConn on a neutral court. I think they might be the best team in the country. Now, starting with Broome, who coming back is just massive. That is huge because now Auburn is probably the nation's most rim dominant team on both ends of the court. I mean, Broome is overwhelming down there. Through 4 games, he has 13 blocks and has shot 22 for 26 at the rim. That is insane. And through 4 games, Auburn leads the nation in 2-point shooting, 71%, and they rank top 10 in 2-point shooting allowed, under 40%. They obliterated 3 pretty good mid-major squads in my beloved Catamounts. That was ugly. But also Kent State and North Alabama, 2 mid-Ken Palm 100 teams. And most importantly, they beat Houston in Texas by shooting 72% from 2-point range against Kelvin Sampson's impenetrable paint denial defense. They shot 11 for 15 at the rim, 7 for 8 in the paint. Do you know how insane that is? You don't score on Houston with post feeds and ball screens. That didn't matter for Auburn. 14 points on 15 ball screens, 11 points on 7 post-ups, 6 from Broome. I mean, that win is not only the most impressive win of the early season, but it's also really important for me in this tournament because Auburn's first round matchup, Iowa State, runs the same exact defensive scheme. Both teams blitz ball screens. They bring 2 to the ball early. They overhelp and deny the paint down low, and then they scramble on the weak side. If Auburn could shred Houston's ball screen blitz, they could do the same to Iowa State. And, you know, going forward, a second round matchup with Dayton or North Carolina, I don't think that's too daunting. I think both squads have good backcourts. I think both teams run relatively small in the front court. They're both like 300th nationally in average height. And I don't think either has the interior two-way firepower to hang with Broome. And if they inevitably meet UConn in the championship, like we just talked about in the intro, we'll see how UConn looks against Memphis and Colorado or Michigan State, but we haven't learned much about them in their 4 blowouts. I'm uneasy about this version of the Huskies, as I talked about. And ultimately, you know, Auburn, best team in the field, probably my best team in the nation. They're the full package for me. I mean, throwing JP Peggs and Miles Kelly in the backcourt with Jones and Baker Mazzara, that gives you perimeter shooting, perimeter defense. Broome will overwhelm opponents at the rim both ways. He'll play awesome drop coverage defense that'll force opponents into bad dribble creation, which will be hard to do against bully ball guards. They have playmaking, spacing, 3-level offense, 3-level defense. They also have all those like around the edges advantages you'd like to see with these teams, especially in the early season. They're top 50 nationally in bench minutes, top 25 in experience, top 40 in continuity, top 50 in height. They take a lot of threes. They deny threes. They win the shot volume battle from deep. They don't turn the ball over. I love my 30-1 tickets on them to win the Natty, and I am more than happy to take them at 3-1 to win the Maui because they should be the favorite. UConn should not be the favorite.
I'm just picturing you going into Horton's Donuts in the morning, just War Eagle. When you show up, when you leave, when you're waving somebody through a stop sign, War Eagle all around. Let me just kick the tires on some of the other teams in this field. I'll take your temperature. We'll start with North Carolina. A little wrinkle worth noting right away for the Tar Heels. Great work by their athletic director. They actually play at Hawaii, playing the Rainbow Warriors ahead of Maui, so they get extra time to acclimate to the time zone change. They're going to stay out there. And the Rainbow Warriors are not just a speed bump. They're off to a 4-0 start. So in terms of a warm-up game, it's perfect. The best player for the Rainbow Warriors, you're going to like it, Tanner Christensen. He's been great for Hawaii, 17-7 thus far on the season. So I like what they did. They're the only team that's going to get out there a few days ahead of time. UNC also looked like a top 5 team against Kansas. Elliot Cadeau has taken that step forward that Coach Hubert Davis promised. He's nearly at 16-8 per game, really limited the turnovers. The only question that I have is that can their bigs continue to take a step forward? Because collectively, they're putting it together. There's not one person who's doing it. Jalen Washington did the dirty work against KU, had a block and 9 rebounds. Jalen Withers also had 9 rebounds against the Jayhawks. What are your thoughts on their upside in this particular tournament? The guard play potential's there with RJ Davis being the offensive engine. but do you think that they have enough on the front line to be able to hang with some of the teams they're going to have to beat to be a champion here?
I don't. I think they're just a little inexperienced on the front line. Like I like Withers. I like his upside. But it's clear that UNC is always going to be a backcourt oriented team, and they have a really good backcourt. I worry about they're going to have to score a lot in transition. I'm not sure if they'll be able to do that consistently across 3 games. And I also worry a bit about their spacing issues because Cadeau just can't shoot the ball. So I'm going to pass on North Carolina. I think that they could be really good. I think it's going to take a few months. They're not a fully formed team like a lot of these high majors are still finding an identity, especially in the transfer portal era. So I'm always looking in the early season to target teams with a lot of continuity and chemistry and cohesion, and then fade teams with less. I think UNC is still working out kinks in the front court.
All right, you pass on door number 1. How about door number 2, Iowa State? The Clones are doing something that always impresses me, which all 5 starters are averaging double digits. Momcilovic is a wonderful stretch for. We know this. Lipsey's a great defender. He already has 9 steals through 3 games this year. As a team, they're turning opponents over on an absurd 28% of their offensive trips. And Curtis Jones and Keyshawn Gilbert, they can take over offensively. They don't, I wouldn't rely on them on a nightly basis to do so, but either one of them can catch fire and go for 25 plus if they knock down enough 3-point shots. And if you're playing Iowa State, you're putting your faith in Coach Otts. In 3 years and Ames, 2 Sweet 16s. He's a hell of a coach. I certainly think from an upside perspective, I know that they have maybe the highest floor in this tournament. I don't know necessarily if they have the offensive firepower to consistently beat all the teams that they're going to need to. But at 9-2, it was very close for me to pull the trigger on them.
Yeah, the great thing about Iowa State is that they play awesome defense. Like we talked about, their ball screen blitz defense is just like Houston's. It's one of the best in the nation. And they have a great point guard. I mean, I love Tamin Lipsey. So that, like you mentioned, that gives them a really high floor. They defend and he'll take care of the ball. He'll table set. And they got scoring and they have continuity. But they play Auburn in the first round. So, and I think they're going to lose because Auburn just ripped apart the same defense last week, and now they get it on a neutral court. So, yeah, I know I can't pull the trigger there. If they somehow upset Auburn, then I would think, yes, they would probably win it all because I think that they could take down UConn. I think they're going to lose in that first round matchup.
So in terms of my best bet, I also am with you on Auburn at 3-1, but let's get into some of the long shots because I think Memphis being 30-1 is too good to pass up. The question I have right off the bat, from a skill perspective, does Memphis have the best 2 guards in this tournament? PJ Haggerty looks like an All-American at times as their go-to scorer. When Tyrese Hunter is limiting his turnovers, he can facilitate both for himself and for his teammates. They have a lot of interchangeable bigs. Dane Danger averaging 10 and 7 as their best bigs so far. The bugaboo here is pretty simple, and it's Penny Hardaway. Like, is he going to be able to be at least a competent coach for every game of this tournament, or is he going to cost them in some of those late game situations, some of those, get out the whiteboard, draw up, you need a bucket kind of plays, competing against some just absolute elite future Hall of Fame coaches in this tournament? What are your thoughts on Penny and Memphis as a 30-1 long shot to win Maui?
Well, you said it. And the problem with Memphis is ball handling. And it's decision-making on the offensive side of the court, which has been a problem for Penny's teams, basically his entire tenure in Memphis. They don't like make the right decisions in a read and react system. And now you've got 2 guards who aren't immune to turnover issues. I mean, especially like Hunter, who has a little bit too high of a turnover rate considering his lower usage role. The other problem that I have with Memphis is that they're shooting way above their head in the early going. I mean, for a team with spacing and shooting issues, they're 46% from 3, even on low volume. That's totally unsustainable. And like, they probably should have lost to San Francisco. They have 3 KenPom top 100 wins, but they needed to shoot nearly 50% from 3 to get there. I think there's some regression coming, but I will say that you're right. They have firepower and they can score a lot and they can run the floor and they can pressure the rim. And if we're catching enough points in the first round against UConn, I'm probably going to bet Memphis at if I can get 9 or 10. And I don't exactly love the matchup for Memphis against UConn in that first round because they're going to attack and transition and pressure the rim, which I think Reed and Johnson can more or less handle. But, UConn has played nobody. They are not battle tested. I think they're still overvalued in the markets because we haven't learned enough about this new roster. And like we talk about, there's all these issues that could come about. They will be facing their first real test here. And meanwhile, Penny took a similar roster last year, similar roster construction, and like an entirely new roster, turned over the team, and it was talented but didn't have much chemistry. And he ran through the non-con. I think he posted 4 KenPom top 75 wins in the non-con. It's when you get into conference play and you play those teams a second time, that's where he really runs into issues. So I think that this could be a wake-up call for UConn, and I think that Memphis could compete here, even if I don't love the matchup. The key is probably how the guards, 2 good defensive guards in Haggerty and Hunter, hang with UConn's like complex secondary actions on the perimeter. I mean, they have to really be on top of it. They have to switch decisively and accurately. But last year's Tigers underneath Hardaway did really well denying secondary actions. So I'd probably take my chances in that first round matchup. And if they could somehow upset an overvalued Husky team, they've got legs to, cash a 30-1 long shot.
Yeah, I'm with you there. That's my best bet for the first round. I would play him down to Memphis +8. I'm also hoping to get him in that 9.5 point range. And it's not been profitable to get in front of the UConn train over the past 2 years outside of 2 mid-season Big East swoons. But you hit on it. Who have they played? The KenPom average for their opponents, New Hampshire, Sacred Heart, Lemoyne, Go Dolphins, and East Texas A&M, 342nd in KenPom. So they have played absolutely nobody. And Hassan Daera, is he the right initiator for this offense? Because I think that's the issue here. In limited minutes, he's averaging almost 3 turnovers per game. Hurley talks about it beyond the rebounding. It was the turnovers against East Texas A&M, 19 in that game. If they get anywhere north of 12, I love getting the points here because it's going to create some easy buckets for Memphis in transition. And I think that can also help offset Memphis's biggest liability, which you talked about, ball handling. Over 17% of their possessions end in giveaways. You can't do that when you're trying to punch up against an elite team. But if it's a wash, if they're within plus 2 or 3 of the turnover margin between UConn and Memphis, I like their chances. I want to take the points. So I'm glad to hear that we're aligned on that one.
All right, before we move on, quick announcement for you guys. Action Network is running back our annual Black Friday sale, offering our best price of the year on a year-long Action Pro subscription. So if you still aren't a Pro subscriber, visit actionnetwork.com/Black Friday to get $40 a year off of Pro and receive instant access to all of the picks and projections from myself, Colin, Calabrese, and our whole Action Network team. That's actionnetwork.com/Black Friday for the best price of the year on Action Pro.
We're going to switch over now to battle for Atlantis, the other tournament. This one is starting on Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving. And I'm going to run you down the card in terms of the odds to win it outright. Gonzaga, the favorite, at +135. Arizona, +180. Indiana, 6-1. Louisville, 10-1. Oklahoma, 17-1. Providence, 25-1. West Virginia, 35-1. And Davidson, 55-1. The Zags are number 3 in the AP poll. Indiana, 16. Arizona, 17. Providence receiving votes in both polls. Let's start with Gonzaga. KenPom and Mia's top-rated team. I think it really comes down to if Ryan Nebhard keeps playing like this, they can win the national championship. They have 5 starters in double digits, but Nebhard is approaching an otherworldly 9-1 assist to turnover ratio. When the Zags aren't turning the ball over, they're going to just run away from just about anybody. Forget about this field, anyone in the entire country. You go back and you watch that Baylor game, they drilled Scott Drew's Bears by 38 points. So I think they are rightly installed, unlike UConn, which we think they're a little bit overvalued in the market. The Zags at +135, I think that's fair. Dropping down to Arizona at +180, I want to take your temperature on this team. They are the up-tempo team of this tournament. Tommy Lloyd wants them to go, go, go. I believe they're top 4 in tempo in the entire country. But the question for me, I'm not putting any money in the Wildcat camp with Caleb Love playing like this. He's been dreadful this season. What are your thoughts on him? What is wrong with him? And can they play at an elite level and replace him in the aggregate if he's not scoring 15 to 20 points per game and being efficient?
He's just not shooting well in the early going. And that's with Caleb Love, you get the good and you get the bad. That's simple, right? Like he's going to shoot your way into games. He's going to shoot your way out of games. And that's why it's tough to back Arizona in a tournament setting like this because they're a high variance squad with a low floor, but they're going to get priced like they're a favorite. And that's not the type of team that you want to back in tournaments like this, because Love could legitimately shoot their way out of the game against Davidson. Like they could lose to like Ken Pop sub 250. I like Tommy Lloyd. I generally trust him. I think that Arizona will be in the mix because they're going to win enough games throughout the season. But yeah, the floor is just so low.
All right, how about Indiana? This is my pick. I think they're a great value at 6-1. I'll tell you why I love them from a roster perspective. Miles Rice was one of the best portal gets in the entire country at point guard. He's capable of 20-5 on any night, and he gives them critical three-point shooting. This is still a team that does not fire up that many triples, but when he's feeling it, he could give you 3 or 4 on the perimeter. Mackenzie Mbako can score in a lot of different ways. Bryson Tucker just put on a mid-range clinic in their win over UNC Greensboro this week. Luke Goody can be a 40% three-point shooter. I can go on about all the interchangeable parts and different leading scorers they can have on a given night. My hang-up with the Hoosiers is simple. It's Woodson. 1 tournament win in 3 years in Bloomington. The Empire Classic last year, they got drilled by 20 by UConn. They end up bouncing back with a win over Louisville in the consolation game. But I question his ability to win in a tournament setting this far from home with some expectations that are now starting to bubble up thanks to their hot start to the season. But I think it's 6-1 with an Arizona team ahead of them in terms of the odds to win this tournament that I agree with you. I think they could lose any game. If they end up, making a run and having an opportunity to win this thing at 6-1, that just seems a little too generous. So that's my pick. I could absolutely hear an argument for the Zags, even at plus 135. Usually it doesn't make sense to tie up your money for that many days for such a low payout, but they could end up being a significant favorite over every single team they play in the field.
I'm out on the Hoosiers, and you're right, it's Woodson. And the reason why is because he's so anti-analytics. He plays too much interior-based basketball. There aren't enough floor spacers on the team. The only floor spacer is probably McKenzie. And so what happens is that they run into crowded interior lanes, and Galloway and Rice aren't immune to turnovers. Neither is Renault or Ballo. Ballo's turned over the ball a good amount in the early going because he's just, his defense has just sagged down on them. So I like the good news is that Chucky Hepburn and Ryan Smith, they're not going to turn the ball over, and they definitely have talent. They're trading threes for twos. You don't win that way.
Now, who is your best bet to win this tournament or long shot? I know that you weren't as enamored with the battle for Atlantis as you were for Maui, but do you have a top play on the board?
Yeah, I'm. This is a tournament that I don't have a great feel for any of the teams in yet, except for Gonzaga. I think Gonzaga rolls through the field. Too much returning production, too much continuity. They were my first national title bet that I placed back in last April. Love that team. But I'm not going to bet them at plus 130. Just tying up money for no reason. Two squads that I think could be interesting as longer shot plays. First is Louisville, 10-1. But both of these squads, Louisville and Providence, are the two teams I'd look at. Similar reasons why. Louisville, high variance squad filled with newcomers. The talent isn't awful, though, and we all love Pat Kelsey, and they're going to take a million threes. They're going to 56% three-point rate in their early going, and they're due for a ton of positive regression there, too. They've shot 30% from deep in the early going. Shot quality projects that closer to 38% based on the quality of attempts taken. If you can take over half your shots from deep and hit 35%, you have a shot to beat anyone on any given night. It's also worth mentioning they rank second in shot quality's adjusted efficiency metric. They grade out well in spacing, shot selection, shot making, rim and three rate, just smart, analytical, anti-Woodson ball. And if those things kind of break right across 3 days next week, who knows? They're going to press a ton too and force turnovers, and they're not going to turn the ball over, so they could really win the shot volume battle, especially from three-point land. Obviously, the bugaboo is that they would have to beat Gonzaga. But again, they could beat anyone on any given night and upset an overwhelming favorite with three-point variance. Now, in the bottom half of the bracket, I do think Providence could be worth a look. I mean, you're getting, 30-1 on them in a wide-open bottom of the bracket. And the Friars are another team that's going to win the three-point volume battle. They rank 8th nationally in three-point rate and top 50 nationally in three-point rate allowed. They're a really physical, switch everything half court defense that funnels everything into isolation, and they take away transition buckets, which could be good against like Oklahoma in the first round, which likes to run. It'll be great against Tommy Lloyd's Wildcats in the second round, who also like to run. And Providence also high variance squad. Both these teams are high variance squads, a lot of newcomers, where like the 99th percentile outcome is really high. Obviously for Providence, I wish Bryce Hopkins was back. I think he's close to returning, but I can't be sure. But either way, those are the two teams I'd look further down the board.
Any favorite plays on Wednesday in that opening round game? I know that we are going off of projections, but this is kind of a blend of Evan Mia, Bart Torvik, doing our best to get within a point and a half. So you can go give us a range that you would play this first round matchup in.
Yeah, Providence again against Oklahoma. Catching 3.5, maybe. I'm not sold on the Sooners. They really only had like two returning producers this year. I think they're really going to miss Javon McCollum, his creation in a pick and roll heavy system. And the three guards they brought in are interesting mid-majors with like high upsides, but not like overwhelming. Duke Miles from High Point, he's probably the key to them sort of hitting their ceiling if he can elevate as a ball screen creator like McCollum did. But like Kobe Elvis as a secondary scorer, catch and shoot guy more. Taylor, same thing as secondary creator. And Jeremiah Fears is a freshman. They're probably going to rely on him a lot to handle the ball. And that could be bad in November. And he's also a very exploitable point of attack defender because he's undersized. So I think, the interior defense has looked a little shaky. And while they've blown out 4 mid-majors in the early going, those 4 teams shot 25% from deep. And they allowed, the Sooners allowed a lot of threes, like a high volume. So I expect sort of regression in that area. And it's tough to keep Wade on the court. So, yeah, I'd maybe look towards Providence if we're catching enough points.
I'm actually going to wrap this up by going against you on the Indiana-Louisville opening round matchup. I'll lay 5 with the Hoosiers. I still need to see it. I understand with Pat Kelsey, all of his experience at college at Charleston, you hit on it. They just bomb away from 3. They averaged over 30 attempts per game in the last 2 years. That was top 5 in terms of 3-point rate in the entire country. But they're not falling. And the only time they played a team in the Pulse this year, they get blown out against Tennessee. They only scored 55 points in that game. Terrence Edwards, their transfer from JMU, shot them out of that game going 2 for 12. My issue with any team that shoots that much, the variance thing is very much real. I understand that if they start falling, they could win that game by 15. But it just doesn't appear to me as of right now that they have a secondary plan. I like teams that can beat you in multiple ways. And really, it's just basically counting on a 3-point variance to heat up in a positive way 3,000 miles from your home floor for the first time this season. I don't see it. I think Indiana can win in different ways. And while I'm not sold on Woodson long-term, I think what they have this year in terms of roster flexibility has an opportunity to at least get them deep into this tournament. So I'll go ahead and lay the 5 there. Understandably, I'm going to be a little bit nervous. I'm hoping that the 3-point variance gods don't burn me there early. For Tanner McGrath, I'm Mike Calabrese. This has been the Big Bets on Campus podcast. This is our first college hoops episode of the year. We have good news on that front. Greg Waddell is going to be joining Stuckey and myself throughout the season. You're going to get 2 episodes per week from us before you know it. But we still have college football to work through here during Feast Week, so make sure to listen in for the Group of 5 deep dive between Mike Iannello and myself, and then the full card from the trash, the garbage, all the way up to the marquee matchups. That's Colin and Stuck, leading into the Saturday live show with Brett McMurphy, Stuck, Colin, myself, and the legendary Heisman Trophy winner, Johnny Menzel. Thanks so much for listening. Enjoy Thanksgiving, and college hoops is back, baby.